My name is Lucinda Vance. I'm 62 years old. That morning, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my Charleston kitchen. Soft and forgiving. I had just poured coffee when my son, Bryce, cleared his throat across the table. His wife, Natalie, sat beside him, hands folded over her designer purse, her smile too smooth to be sincere. "Mom," Bryce began, voice steady but rehearsed. "From now on, I think it's best if your paycheck is sent directly to my account. I can manage your bills, taxes, everything. You don't need to worry about that stuff anymore." The spoon slipped from my hand, clinking softly against the saucer. He didn't flinch. Natalie tilted her head and added brightly, "It's for your own good. You shouldn't have to deal with finances at your age." I studied their faces, the polite concern, the quiet expectation. Bryce had my husband's steady eyes, but none of his grace. For years, I'd watched him grow into a man who measured love by control. I smiled faintly, keeping my voice even. "If that's what you think is best," I said, masking the storm inside as I reached for the teapot again. The silence that followed was almost tender. Bryce exhaled, relieved. Natalie relaxed, scrolling through her phone. I poured more tea, steadying my hand. The sugar dissolved slowly, swirling into gold. I had learned long ago that anger only feeds those who want power over you. So I let the moment pass. I nodded, smiled, and let them believe they'd won. After they left, I stood at the window, watching the oaks sway along Whitaker Street. My reflection stared back, composed, but different. The crack had started, small but sure, somewhere deep beneath the calm. By evening, I already knew what I would do. By the time the sun began to set, the house no longer looked like mine. The dining room table was gone, the framed photographs packed away, and only 2 wooden chairs remained, ones I had kept from my mother's porch. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and change. I'd sold nearly everything that afternoon. The antique hutch, the velvet sofa Bryce once called outdated, even the silver set my husband and I received at our wedding. It had taken only a few hours and 2 polite men from an estate service. When they asked if I was moving, I'd smiled. Something like that. At 7 sharp, Bryce and Natalie arrived. Bryce looked proud, confident, ready for what he thought would be another evening of control. Natalie stepped through the door, her heels clicking against the bare floor. "Mom," she said, pausing, "where's all your furniture?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Oh, I sold it," I said lightly, preparing for the new arrangement. "You'll be handling my finances now. Remember, I thought I should simplify." Bryce blinked, his composure slipping. "You sold everything." "Almost," I replied. Setting 3 bowls of soup on the counter, I kept the essentials. They stood in the silence that followed, their eyes darting around the hollow room. Natalie forced a brittle laugh. "Well, this is minimal," I smiled, ladling soup into the bowls. "It's peaceful," I said softly, letting the emptiness speak louder than any words could. Bryce cleared his throat, but whatever he meant to say never came out. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons and the hum of the refrigerator, filling the emptiness between us like a quiet warning. When they left, the house felt lighter. The walls didn't echo loss, they echoed freedom. After Bryce and Natalie left, the house settled into a silence that felt almost sacred. I washed the dishes slowly, the sound of running water steadying my thoughts. The night air drifted in through the open window, carrying the faint scent of salt and magnolia from the marsh. It was the kind of evening Charles used to love, quiet, patient, full of meaning beneath the calm. In the corner of the living room stood his old mahogany desk, the one he'd used to write invoices for his small carpentry business. I hadn't opened it in years. After he died, I kept it locked, afraid that touching his things would somehow erase the memory of his presence. But that night, I felt something different, an impulse not of grief, but of purpose. The key was still in the porcelain jar above the fireplace, exactly where he'd left it. I turned it in the lock, and the drawer gave a soft click. Inside, beneath layers of neatly folded papers, I found what I hadn't realized I'd been needing: proof that I wasn't as helpless as Bryce believed. There were property deeds, one for the house, one for a small parcel of land outside Beaufort. There were pension records from Charles's union and life insurance documents I had never fully read. My breath caught when I saw the names. Every account, every asset, every title listed under my maiden name. Lucinda Avery. Charles had done it quietly, perhaps knowing that one day I might need protection, not from strangers but from those closest to me. I sat back in the chair, the papers spread out before me like a quiet revelation. For the first time in years, I felt something other than fear or exhaustion. I felt prepared. The porch light flickered outside, catching on the edge of the documents, old paper glowing softly, like proof that foresight can outlive ye. Chapter 4. The Past. She built. The documents lay open across the desk, their edges yellowed with time. My fingers brushed the ink, and suddenly the years folded back on themselves: every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every choice that shaped the man my son had become. After Charles's death, Bryce was only 8. I remember the day I sold my wedding ring to cover the mortgage, how he watched me from the hallway and didn't understand. I told him it was just jewelry, that love wasn't something you wore, it was something you did. I worked 2 jobs back then, days at the textile shop, nights cleaning offices downtown. There were weeks I slept no more than 4 hours a night. Bryce always had new shoes, clean clothes, and money for school trips. But my dinners were often toast and tea. I hid the fatigue behind smiles so he'd never feel the weight of it. When he turned 16, I saved every spare dollar to buy him a used car. He called it freedom. I called it peace of mind, knowing he could drive home safely after late classes. Later, when college came, I took a second mortgage to cover tuition. He graduated, shaking hands with the dean, while I stood in the back of the auditorium, clapping through tears no one saw. Somewhere along the line, the meaning of love had shifted. Everything I gave to help him stand on his own had become his expectation. My devotion assumed, never questioned. I closed the folder gently and looked at the empty space where the family photo used to hang. The past was still here in the walls, in the air, but I was no longer the woman who built her son's world at the expense of her own. The next morning began like any other coffee, quiet, and the low hum of the ceiling fan above the kitchen table. But something gnawed at me, a subtle imbalance, like a clock ticking half a second behind. I reached for my checkbook, the same one I'd used for 20 years, and noticed a transaction I didn't remember making. It wasn't much at first, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, enough to make me second-guess myself. I told myself it must have been a bill I'd forgotten, a transfer I'd set up months ago. But as I flipped through the ledger, the numbers began to tell a story that didn't feel like mine. At the bank, the air smelled of carpet cleaner and cold air conditioning. A young teller named Marlene greeted me with a polite smile. When I asked for a printout of recent withdrawals, her expression shifted slightly. "Of course. Mrs. Vance," she said, fingers tapping across the keyboard. Moments later, she handed me the paper lines of dates, numbers, and locations that made my chest tighten. Several withdrawals had been made from a branch across town, one I'd never visited, and then she hesitated. "There's also a small loan attached to your account," she said carefully. It was co-signed by someone named Bryce Vance. The world tilted beneath me. Bryce's name stared back in unfamiliar ink. A stranger's hand cloaked as my son's, stealing what he assumed was his right. I thanked her, took the papers, and walked out into the bright afternoon light. The sky felt too blue, too indifferent. At home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the same table that once held birthday cakes and homework. My hands trembled as I traced the signatures. The withdrawals, the proof of something I had long refused to see. That night, I sat in the quiet of my empty living room, the walls bare, the air still. Air I had always believed betrayal came with shouting, with slammed doors. But it didn't. Sometimes it arrived quietly on printed paper, signed in familiar handwriting. The next morning, I dressed with care, gray slacks, pressed blouse, low heels, the kind of outfit that made people take you seriously. I gathered the papers from the kitchen table, slid them into a folder, and drove downtown. The clouds hung low over Charleston, heavy with the promise of rain. Robert Hale's office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same oak shelves lined with law books, the same brass lamp casting a steady pool of light across his desk. He had been Charles's closest friend and handled our affairs after his death. When he looked up and saw me in the doorway, his face softened. "Lucinda," he said gently, standing to shake my hand. "It's been too long." I sat across from him, the folder clutched in my lap. "I think Bryce has been taking money from my accounts," I said. My voice didn't tremble. I placed the papers before him, and he read in silence, his brow tightening. After a while, he leaned back, folded his hands, and exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing coming here." For the next hour, we went through everything. Bank statements, co-signed loans, even the old property deeds Charles had left behind. Robert moved with calm precision, like a surgeon repairing something delicate. "We'll secure your assets under your maiden name," he said. "Everything goes into a private trust. Your accounts will be frozen until we finish the transfer." He paused, looking at me over his glasses. "If they come asking questions, let them. We'll let them come to you." I signed each document carefully, the pen steady between my fingers. It was the same hand that once wrote permission slips, grocery lists, and birthday cards for a son who no longer saw me as his mother, but as a resource. When I left Robert's office, the rain had started to fall. Slow, deliberate drops against the windshield like a warning or a cleansing. By the time I reached home, the fear that had followed me for weeks was gone, replaced by something stronger, a calm that felt like armor. 2 weeks passed without a call. The house stayed quiet, filled only with the sounds of rain and distant traffic. Then, on a calm Friday afternoon, I sent a message to Bryce dinner at 7, just the three of us. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, casual, unaware. I cooked his favorite meal, rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread the way he liked it when he was a boy. The smell filled the house like a memory, softening the edges of what I knew had to come. By the time they arrived, the table was set with candles and my best china. "Smells wonderful." "Mom," Bryce said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Natalie followed with her usual bright tone. "We were worried you were mad at us." "You've been so quiet." I smiled. "Just busy." Dinner began as it always had, small talk. Compliments, the rhythm of a family pretending to be one. Bryce spoke about work. Natalie scrolled through her phone between bites. The clock ticked gently on the wall. When their plates were nearly empty, I stood and walked to the sideboard. My hands didn't shake as I placed the folder on the table between the dessert plates. "What's this?" Bryce asked, his voice light but wary. "Something you should see," I said. He flipped the folder open. Bank records, withdrawal slips, the co-signed loan, his signature clear, unsteady, undeniable. Natalie leaned closer, her smile fading. "I don't understand," she began, but I cut her off softly. "You don't have to. I already do." Bryce looked at me, color draining from his face. You went through my things. No, I said, voice steady. I went through what belongs to me, not you. Every detail is mine to see. Silence filled the room like a tide. Natalie started gathering her purse, muttering something about misunderstandings. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed again. I met his eyes. I wanted you to see how trust dies, not with anger, not even with betrayal. It dies when someone you love thinks you won't notice. He tried to speak, but the words didn't come. The only sound left was the low hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping against the window pane. When they left, the candlelight still flickered on the folder's surface. The paper's unmoved truth sitting quietly between us, waiting to see who would look away first. The storm came just after midnight. The rain started as a whisper on the windows, then grew into a steady roar, drumming against the porch roof like a heartbeat. I had been reading in bed, the lamp casting a soft pool of light across the room, when I heard the tires screech outside. Headlights flared through the curtains, slicing the darkness. Then came the pounding fists against the front door, sharp, angry, insistent. Mom, open this door. Bryce's voice, raw and unrecognizable. You think you can destroy us? Natalie's voice followed, high-pitched and trembling. You called the bank, didn't you? You froze everything. We can't pay the mortgage now. Do you even understand what you've done? I didn't move from my chair, didn't move from... The rain struck harder, a curtain of silver between us. I could hear the panic beneath their fury, the tone of people realizing the ground had shifted under their feet. Another blow landed on the door. You've gone insane, Bryce bellowed, voice trembling with fury. We are your family. You owe us everything, your money, your trust, your life. I looked toward the mantel, where the folder still rested. The papers inside had already done their work. Robert had filed the protective orders that morning, his calm voice assuring me everything would be handled if Bryce tried to retaliate. You won't need to say a word, he'd said. Just stay inside. Let the system speak for you. So I stayed, outside. Voices rose again, muffled by the downpour. Then another sound. The sharp whoop of a siren, slicing through the night. Blue and gold lights splashed across the curtains, painting the walls in waves of color. Through the window, I saw 2 police cars parked behind Bryce's sedan. Officers stepped out, rain glinting on their jackets. The shouting stopped. Bryce's shoulders sagged as an officer spoke to him, calm and firm. Natalie covered her face with both hands. I stood at the window, watching as they were guided back to their car. The lights flickered across the wet driveway, then faded into the storm. When silence returned, I switched off the lamp. The rain still fell, softer now, washing the night clean. I sat back in the dark, my reflection faint in the glass, older, steadier, and utterly still. The storm had come. I had let it pass. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and paper. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, pale and cold. I sat at the long wooden table beside Robert, hands folded in my lap, my name printed neatly on a placard. Across from me, Bryce sat rigid, eyes fixed on the table. Natalie beside him looked smaller than I remembered, her confidence drained to a nervous silence. The judge's gavel sounded, sharp as a heartbeat. We're here to address case number 4781, Vance versus Vance. Robert rose first, his voice calm, measured. He laid out the facts: unauthorized withdrawals, fraudulent signatures, forged cosigner documents. His words landed like quiet stones, each one building the shape of truth. When it was Bryce's turn, he hesitated before standing. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he said, voice tight. I was just trying to help her manage things. I made mistakes Natalie didn't know. Natalie turned sharply toward him. That's not true, she blurted. You told me she'd agreed. Her voice cracked under the pressure, and for a moment, the courtroom fell utterly silent. except for the ticking clock on the wall. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Vance, would you like to say anything?" I rose slowly, steady on my feet. "Only this," I said. "Love isn't ownership. I raised my son to stand on his own, not to stand on my shoulders." The judge nodded once, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, it was final. "All assets will be restored to Mrs. Vance. Restitution is ordered in full within 6 months. This court is adjourned." Outside, reporters waited in the drizzle, microphones reaching toward me. One asked if I felt vindicated. I smiled faintly. I built my peace the same way I built my life quietly. Then I walked away, the sound of rain swallowing the noise behind me. Spring came quietly to Charleston. The azaleas along Whitaker Street bloomed in slow pink bursts, and the air carried that familiar scent of salt and magnolia. I had painted the front porch pale blue again. Charles always said it kept away bad luck, and each evening I sat there, watching the light shift across the marsh. It had been 6 months since the hearing. The house was calm now, lighter somehow, as if it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. The papers were signed, the account settled, and with Robert's help, the Whitaker Fund was born, a small legal foundation that offered free guidance to seniors caught in financial traps like mine. Each week, letters arrived from people I'd never met, thanking me for the courage they hadn't yet found in themselves. I spent my mornings at the office downtown, helping where I could, listening mostly. Sometimes justice began not in courts, but in quiet rooms with coffee cups and trembling hands. That evening, as the sky turned amber, I came home to find a letter on the porch table. The handwriting stopped me. "Bryce's mom. I finally understand." No apologies, no explanations. Just 6 words written in ink that had smudged slightly at the edge, as if he'd hesitated before finishing. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside the old photographs. Stepping outside, I turned on the porch light, the same one Charles had wired 40 years ago. The bulb flickered once before glowing steady, casting a soft circle on the steps. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." The night settled around me, gentle and still, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but full.